what holds you back from taking the exams faster? So we just mentioned Ben was doing the 7 and 7, and the 7 and 7 is kind of nutty, right? Like it's sort of showy, and it's kind of a sort of fun, showy thing to do, but there's no reason why anybody has to do it in 7 straight days. But at the same time, there's no reason you don't necessarily have to take months between each exam either. So like, what do you think it is that sort of makes you take it in these sort of slower paces? The one, how did you find that right, the one that feels right, and what is it that slows it down? Let's start with Kyle. Why don't we start with you?
All right. When I think back to when I first started taking the exam, I was working in a small office where we were pressed with very demanding deadlines. And there was one particular project that really kept me very busy. I think it was really professional responsibilities at that time that really prevented me from diving in and taking, at that time, was apparently just one per year. It may have just been my introduction to the profession as well, and not being entirely confident in all the subjects. But moving thereafter, I did prove to myself, and maybe it was under different work circumstances that I was able to take them more quickly. It just was a matter of finding that time in my life.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a long tradition in architecture offices of especially when you're the new young gun in the firm, and like you're sitting there cranking out the work, and everybody's counting on it, and everybody's there till 7, 8 o'clock at night, or whatever. It's really hard to get any studying in if that's what you're doing, so that's, trying to find the right balance between, holding your own in the office setting, but also, finding time to set aside and say, I need to do this. This is part of my career. I've got to get this thing done. So trying to find that balance, I think, is really an interesting one. And, everybody has trouble with that.
It's interesting. I actually was speaking with one of the other folks just the other day who took the 7 and 7 kind of challenge. And she was saying that, she's a working mom, so she has kids. She's, working a full-time job. And she was sort of saying that for her, and I don't want to sound like I'm a huge advocate of the 7 and 7 thing. I could probably kind of take it or leave it, but it was interesting what she said, because we heard somebody say the exact opposite. And her thing was, how could you not take 7 exams in 7 days when you have so much stuff going on in your life? You just need to clear the decks for 2 months, study, and take them and see how you do.
And it was interesting. If you take away the fact that they cost money, right? Which obviously they do cost money, so it's you can't take that away. But if you take that part of it away for a second, like, what's the worst that can happen? Worst that can happen is you fail a couple of them. Maybe you fail more than a couple, but you will definitely have learned in that process. So that's sort of what I was saying at the beginning, is kind of take away the preciousness of this stuff. Like, nobody wants to spend money they don't need to spend, but also just it's okay to just dive in. Doesn't mean you have to do 7 and 7, right? Maybe you do 2 a week or something, or like, but you want to feel comfortable, but it's okay also just to sort of test the waters and see what you find. How about Amanda? Any thoughts about what would make it go faster for you?
Well, I took my first 3 exams right before NCARB had this 3-month hiatus where they had to reorganize everything. I'm not sure why they did it, but basically you couldn't take an exam or schedule an exam for 3 months back in 2014. So that held me back a little bit. And then on top of that, I had a health issue as well in that same time period. So that 3 months turned into a 6-month window where I wasn't studying or taking any exams.
When you're an architect, you're not allowed to have health issues. So you have to just work through it. Yeah.
So that was the main thing. And then again, workload, to add to what Kyle mentioned. It also, I think, contributed to at least one test that I failed, unfortunately, probably because I was working too much and not studying enough.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the other thing to say, I kind of started with was, you want to have a plan. You want to come up with how you're going to approach this and make a plan. But you also have to know that there's no way you would know in your plan that you were going to have a health issue. So you also want to be ready to change the plan. right? The plan is to be a useful tool. So you want to be active in thinking and sort of planning it out, but then also be ready to do what you need to do to kind of make it roll forward. Allison, any other thoughts, or is sort of same kind of thinking?
I guess for me it was mostly a mental game. I passed my first exam and signed up right away for my second, and I took PPP and I failed it, and I really blamed it on thinking I needed more experience and practice, and I hadn't really realized that you can study for these exams and get all the material you need from the study material combined with your experience from school and from practice and everything. But something about it, I thought I needed more time working outside of grad school. And so it was kind of a mental game for me. I took a little bit of time to just keep working, and life got in the way, and I started renovating my condo, and then it was summer, and you have to take advantage of those summer days in Chicago. So I think once fall hit, I realized that if you really dig into the material, there's a lot to learn from it, and I started picking the pace up faster.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's just sort of the nature of how these things go. That idea of the exam is really about having experience out in the world, and so it's much easier to take if you have a couple of years of experience. But nobody's experience is going to, no normal architect their experience is going to be sort of evenly distributed between all these different topics. So no matter what, you're going to need to be sort of looking out for different different books and different sources of materials in order to be able to kind of fill in all those gaps. And I think people often think that they need to be farther ahead in the process in order to take the exam than they really do need to. One of the things we were chatting with the folks from a.r.e. a couple months ago about the upcoming changes, and one of the conversations we had with them was, when the sort of older architects are always like, here's a tough question, this will stump them, and their response is like, well, why would we want to stump them? Like, what's the point in that? Like nobody's expecting young architect in the process to know everything. Like what they are expecting is that you know enough to be able to go out on your own and start and learn and know how to talk to engineers and be able to generally know how to write the contracts and all that, so you don't get into trouble, so nobody else gets into trouble, right? So the expectation is you're not an expert. The expectation is that you have that sort of competent level.
That's right. And my favorite thing that they say at a.r.e. is that we're just assessing folks for minimum competence, which I think we are going to turn into a T-shirt here.
Yeah, we're totally turning that into
everyone
a T-shirt.
Who passes, who tells us they pass, we're sending them a minimally competent T-shirt.
Which, I mean, we're joking, but it's a useful thing to hear, right? Because when you realize that, like, they are not testing whether you're an expert. They are not testing whether you're a fabulous designer. Is none of those things. It's just, do you get the basics of it? Could you have a reasonable conversation with an engineer? Could you understand how to set up a set of meetings and with a client, and like what do they need to know and when, and that kind of thing. So it's important to kind of understand that having experience is useful, but there's also other things that you can get through other sources.